making it this way. Rain, all I wanna do is love you. Rain, making my sunny clouds gray. Rain, I just want you to stay. Rain, why you trying to play me this way? We don't talk like we used to, baby. Girl, you give good love, Rain. I never wanted to be with anyone else but you, Rain.
Well, everybody out there who is watching this, my name is Benny Ninja, and I am the father of the House of Ninja. And I guess I will start this off with who I am, how I became who I am, and where I plan on going with this. And basically, I am who I am because I am in love with myself, and I am my #1 fan. And what made me who I am today is the dance Vogue. If you don't know what Vogue is, I will now break it down to you. And I will break down exactly where it came from, how it started, and how I am, or how I got to where I am with it. And basically, Vogue is an expression of oneself, and basically it's about how comfortable you are with yourself, how you perceive yourself, and then how you want the world to see yourself. And it's one of those dances that you're either telling somebody off, or you're telling them how amazing you are, and you're really not caring about how they feel about you. And now to go back, I've been dancing now, I have been voguing in the art form of Vogue for 21 years. I started, the first time I saw Vogue was in 1989. I started to pick it up and started practicing it in 1990. It took me about a year to realize that it's really what I wanted to do. I think in the beginning when I first saw Vogue, I thought it was a little too gay, but at the same time I was having conflict with my own sexuality. So I think during that time I didn't want to admit that I was gay, or that I wanted to be what the word was that everybody said. So I steered away from the dance. But it was one of those dances, it was one of those movements, it was one of those art forms that when you seen it, you knew where you belonged. And I think that's really what happened. I knew where I belonged, and I tried to steer away from it because I was afraid of the indifference. And I ended up studying it and becoming one of the best there is. Hello. Now, just to give you some background and insight on where and how Vogue began. Vogue really began in the 70s, but I don't want to say that it began in the 70s, but it did. And what Vogue became, the first dance was called posing. And as you heard Tyrone Proctor speak about earlier, posing really began in LA and worked its way somehow out to New York. And there were the legends and icons that we know today, and I will say icons, please, icons. The icons of today, that we know today, to be Pepper LaBeija, to be Paris Dupree, Willie Ninja, all of these amazing individuals helped to create Vogue to what it is today. And they're the ones who took posing and brought it to life with movement, and hence the word Vogue. Also, what inspired Vogue was fashion magazines, fashion. If you know anything about whacking, whacking was a West Coast based dance, and that was because if you look at West Coast and the styles of West Coast and the life of West Coast is all about television and movies. Now you look at Vogue and you look at the characteristics and what influenced it, it is fashion. And if you look at East Coast, the East Coast is known for fashion. And those were our influences. It was the models on the runway. It was the models in the magazine that helped to influence it. But one of the biggest influences were the black models that were coming out that helped the black community, because it was the gay black community that created this dance. When they saw these black models walking down runways for the first time, they realized that there was a connection, that they could be this, and that is what started their hearts and the engines rolling and the wheels going, that helped to create this dance or this art form. Hence the word Vogue, hence Benny Ninja.
Voguing should do.
To name a few of the most important things that help to name a few of the things that would help a dancer or a wannabe voguer to become a good voguer would be, the first thing is to connect with yourself. You have to know who you are as a person. And that means even the negatives about yourself. But you have to take those negatives and somehow make them positives. And again, the most important part of Vogue is knowing thyself. You have to know your limitations. You have to know you have to know what your body is able to do. And that goes so that you're able to go with inside and bring that out, because Vogue is not something that you hold within yourself. It's something that you let go. It's something you portray. It's an image, it's a sound, it's a look, it's a feeling, and the world has to know that. So the most important thing for me to explain to somebody who wants to learn how to Vogue is to first know who you are. Secondly, you have to understand music. You have to listen to music. And I don't mean hear it. I mean listen. Everybody hears music. Everybody hears people talking. Everybody hears sound. But when you stop and you listen, you hear what the sounds are that create the word sound. Then you will then understand how to perceive and how to work through the dance itself. Now, after you listen to music and you now know yourself, you have to learn the moves. And the moves, they're very simple, but they're hard to understand. They're hard to get. And they're the most simplest moves in the world. But the hardest thing to do is to create lines. And I don't mean that it's hard. It's complicated because people don't... people limit themselves to what they can and they cannot do. And I think that's what holds people back. And when you let go of all that, you'd be amazed at what you can create with your body. There are things that I say to myself that I cannot do, but then I sit back and I try them and I'm amazed at the things that I can do. So again, it's knowing yourself, listening to the music, and learning the moves. Once you learn these three things, you're on the road to becoming a statement, a star in Vogue. Again, the most important thing is knowing yourself, listening to the music, and then learning the moves. But in order to learn the moves, in my opinion, open your eyes. You have to see it. You have to watch it. You have to study it. And the best way to do that is to go to a club, go to somebody who knows what they're doing, and watch them, ask questions. So the biggest thing is be inquisitive. Why women started to dance Vogue? Well, that's a really... why women started to dance Vogue was because the gay men were emulating the women and realized how fucking beautiful they were. Because in all honesty, Vogue was not started by women. Vogue was started by the gay community. So when it really began, it was the men that were doing it. And the next women that started to Vogue, the first women that started to Vogue were the transsexuals. They were the men that became women. And, then there were... I really can't say transsexuals. They were the drag queens who started to do the Vogue first, because back in the 70s, it wasn't, the thing to do was not to become a transsexual. Back then it was to be a drag queen. And back then it was a lot of straight women that were hanging around the gay men that were basically helping to teach the men how to be feminine with their moves. But when Vogue first really began, it was a boy thing. It was very manly. It was called Old Way, or what we know today to be Old Way. And it wasn't feminine. The women were feminine in Vogue. And I think that's when they picked it up, because they saw the gay men emulating the women of the fashion magazines. And the real women figured, hey, I'm a real woman. It's real easy for me to be this already. I don't have to emulate it. I am that. So they started to watch the men do it, and they figured, hey, let me try this. So I really don't think that it was what made a woman do it or what made a woman try to Vogue. I think, a gay man's best friend is most of the time it's a woman. And, when a woman hangs around a gay man, she picks up a lot of his traits and he picks up a lot of her traits. And I think it was a shared experience between, the gay world and the straight world, or the straight women at that time, because we really weren't hanging out with straight men that were doing it. It was more the gay men hanging out with straight women, and we shared that emotion of being gay and women together, that we figured, hey, let's kill the world together with this dance. And that's really how women took to it. But there was also a time when then it became fashionable for men to be women, and it was fashionable for men to become transsexuals. And when that happened, women were pushed out of it. And then it became a gay and a transsexual thing. Now, a lot of people want to say that transsexualism is gay, and for those people, then you really don't understand transsexualism, because transsexualism is not a gay thing. Transsexualism is a woman or a man trapped in the wrong body, and they're straight. They're really straight, because if you feel yourself as being a woman and you were born in a man's body and you're emulating yourself as being a woman and you're being with a man and you're dating a man, then you're really straight. So when that happened, the transsexuals pushed the women out, because they were the new women of Vogue. And recently, women have started to come back into the voguing scene, which is, to me, it's amazing, because I don't think it is a dance that should be kept to a sexual orientation. It should be given to the people who are willing to respect it and give the best out of it. Keep it on a positive note. You know what I'm saying? The women now are bringing it back, and they're keeping it at a positive note. They're coming back and they're taking it back by full force, and I love it. Voguing itself, the dance Vogue, started in the 70s. What started in the 30s was the drag balls. And what that was it was an underground, it was basically an underground movement that allowed drag queens and the fashion elite of Harlem to go and feel free. It was their way of expressing themselves in front of their peers and around their peers. It was their way of being royalty for a night or, an evening. And it took them weeks to get ready for it, prepare themselves for it. And again, those were drag balls. What happened with that was the gay men of the 70s, I mean, this had gone on from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And what happened was the gay men that didn't want to dress up, that were supporting the drag queens and the drag balls, wanted to become a part of it without having to get dressed up. So this was their way of being a part of the community and having a part in the drag balls. Again, in the beginning, it was very Vegas showgirls. The drag queens were wearing the feathers, the beads, the boas, and the makeup, and they were wearing these big, huge, overdone outfits that would, rival Vegas. Vegas wasn't doing it at that point. These drag queens were doing it. They were making their own costumes. They were, planning these costumes and looks for months to go out and become. And little by little, the gay community started to find their niche. And what I mean by that is, You know, before that, the gays were in the clubs, and you know that was their spot. You know, the clubs. But if you know anything about that, Stonewall, you know, the fight that the gays had to go through to be equal in America. This was part of that fight. You know, taking on this gay lifestyle, and then taking on this gay persona, and then taking this dance that helped us to live. You know, it put our community, it placed us somewhere, it made us belong. And instead of us just sitting back and watching the drag queens do something, the men were able to now join in. So that's when voguing really began, which was in the 70s. And again, it started off as posing, where it was a simple move and a pose, a simple move and a pose, a simple move and a pose, where once it came out into the streets, and it hit the streets of Harlem, and the younger generation caught on to it, they started influencing, you know, the things that they were going to school to learn. Ballet, taekwondo, martial arts, not taekwondo, but martial arts, tutting, breakdancing had some type of influence on it, and it became movement. So posing went from posing right into Vogue. And that's really how it began. So what you were talking about, what you heard in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s, and 60s, was the drag ball scene. The voguing really didn't come along until the late 70s. The style of music that voguers listen to is and has always been house music. Understand why, and the reason why we listen to the house music is because it's a part of our culture. And it started, you know, house music, if you understand house music, started from disco. So it's always been in the black community. Disco has always been a part of the black community, and it will always be a part of the black community. It's something that we created disco. You know, the black community created disco. So it's been within us to have that. Out of disco came house. And what that was it was a faster BPM, and it was a harder bass or a harder drum. And it's that drum that drives Vogue. If you watch Vogue and you understand Vogue, you'll know that Vogue, the movement of Vogue, is done to the repetitive beat of house music. And it's what keeps us going, it's what keeps it going. And without that drum, without that bass, Vogue doesn't seem as hard. It's not, it doesn't read clearly. You really need that bass, you need that drum to drive the voguing force forward. You need to hear it and feel it in order to hit it. So it will always be house music. Now, I'm not saying that people don't vogue to hip hop and people don't vogue to classical, and people, I think once you learn how to vogue, you can vogue to any type of music. It's like any style of dance, you know, once you learn, or anything that you do. Once you learn how to roller skate, you can roller skate on ice, concrete, grass, you can roller skate on anything once you learn. And it's the same thing with Vogue. Once you learn how to vogue, you can dance to anything. I just think that for voguers, what drives us and what makes us feel the music is house music. It's that bass, it's that drum, the pounding, boom, 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 boom. Once you hear that, you have no other choice but to let go and just start posing and voguing and moving. So I don't want to say that, you know, it might not change, because who knows what the future is going to bring. But for right now, and for where it's come from, house music runs it, baby. Is Malcolm McLaren house music? Understand that Malcolm McLaren, he's done house music, and I think more so Malcolm McLaren was dibbling and dabbling with the idea of house music, and the reason he wanted to dibble and dabble in the idea of house music was because of Willie Ninja. He saw Willie Ninja dancing, and he wanted to bring him into it, and in the same token, Willie Ninja helped to inspire Malcolm McLaren to create a house beat. And for those of you who don't know, that is why did I go blank? Deep in Vogue. The name of the song by Malcolm McLaren with Voguing that became a house beat was called Deep in Vogue. So not only was it a house beat, but it was also a way to advertise Vogue. So I'm not going to say that Malcolm McLaren isn't house music because he's made one. So yeah, Malcolm McLaren is a little bit of house and a little bit of fashion and a whole lot of fag.